welcome to the Weave Your Magical World podcast. I'm excited to introduce our guest today, which is Adrian Hanks. Welcome, Adrian. Thanks for being here.
Wonderful. Great to be here. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this as well. I actually only just finished editing your wife Arlene's interview yesterday. So
fantastic. I'm looking forward to hearing that one.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, you know her quite well. But yeah, she was amazing. So that was really cool. So quick little intro, but we're going to get a little bit more into your story soon. So you're a published author, you're a counselor and a psychotherapist, but you're also into something that also Arlene is studying in as well, with, if I say this correct, Anthroposophical?
Yeah, Anthroposophy, which is based on Rudolf Steiner's work and initiatives. He was alive about 100 years ago, so we actually met through that portal, if you like, of Anthroposophy.
You and Arlene.
Yeah, I met her in South Africa. We were both studying psychotherapy under that umbrella of Anthroposophy, which is the work of Rudolf Steiner. That was 18 years ago now I met her there, so it's a while ago. And I've been involved for about 30 years following the initiatives of Rudolf Steiner. So he's been a big part of my life for a very long time.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Just changing my screen there a little bit. And then you're also a speaker and you create programs. And one of the programs that you run is the Blue Wren Society. And that is...
Yeah, the Blue Wren Foundation, yeah.
The Blue Wren Foundation. And so that is the one that is really aimed at supporting men within relationships. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. It's very much about relationship education and helping and supporting families and men to really look at what we call the line in the sand in relationships. So, and I can speak more of that as we go through our conversation as well. It's quite a deep, beautiful topic to share. Men's work. I've been involved with men's work now for over 25 years. And I'm really, really passionate about that. So I can certainly tell some more about the Blue Wren as we go through the conversation.
Awesome. Yeah. So just a heads up for anyone who's listening, this is going to be really the focus of our talk, is going to be about how we can, if you're a man, and how you can support yourself and step more fully into who you truly are, your sacred masculine, how you can have better relationships with yourself and other people, that kind of thing. But also, if you're listening to this and you're not a man, then you're going to benefit a lot from it as well. Just maybe understanding the struggles and the things they're going through, or the things that they're reaching towards.
Yep, absolutely.
Cool. And so I always like to start with like a little bit of a corridor, a little bit of a talk around kind of your story and where that came from. And I want to kick that off with, because I read your mission statement, and so I'm just going to read that out to our listeners, and then I'm going to ask you a question about it. Okay, so my vision and mission is to help and bring about more consciousness onto the planet, and to support and inspire people to live a life full of purpose, passion, and joy. I aim to deliver this through my writing, coaching, counseling, psychotherapy, and teaching, and by choosing to live this life for myself as much as I'm able to do so. So, awesome mission. And my question is, how is it in your life that you managed to do this for yourself? How does that play out?
Yeah, look, God, it probably, if I go back to way back when I was a young child, born in the UK, lived in a very small little village in the UK with mum and dad separated when I was about 10, and had two siblings, a sister and a brother. And around about that age of 10, 11 years old, was the first time I actually experienced something tangibly spiritual. And I was on my way back from my primary school, and England's full of history of old churches being destroyed by Cromwell's army and all that there. And in my little village, there was a church that did get destroyed by Oliver Cromwell's army, called St. Mary's Church. And it was sort of documented historically. And while I was walking back from school one day, I saw a spirit, I saw a ghost, and in that area. And I had a very good relationship with my headmaster, a man called Mr. Ginjul, a Canadian man, beautiful, he's one of my first teachers. And I took that to him and I said, I've just seen this, and he validated my experience. which was an amazing thing for an adult to do to a child at that age, at 10 years old.
It really is. And when you said he validated it, he validated that there was a church there, or the specific ghost you saw was somebody.
Yeah. Well, so he told me the history. He said, hey, that was where St. Mary's Church was. And he said, and what you saw, or I think it was, you know, something like you probably saw, one of the spirits from that time that didn't manage to get from, you know, I think he said something like from earth to heaven or something like that. You know, he was sort of talking about those stuck souls. I didn't know it at the time, but I do now. And he validated that experience for me. So of course, from then, rather than closing down my intuitive spiritual insight, it opened it, because I had suddenly had permission. So I started to have very earlier on spiritual experiences. And then I closed them down myself to some degree from the real spiritual world. By about 13, 14, started getting into my drugs and alcohol. And at that time, with my drug taking, I believed I was getting more into spirituality. But of course, the opposite was happening. I was closing down my spirituality and getting into that more of that fantasy realm that drugs bring. You know, drugs don't really take us, my opinion, drugs don't take us into the spiritual world. They inhibit, and they just keep us in the fantasy world. And as I know from experience, both, one is fantasy and one is spiritual. So I differentiate.
That's a really important point that you're bringing up right there, because I think if you're someone who hadn't ever experienced the true spiritual world, you could easily be fooled into thinking that the fantasy of drugs is spirituality, right? Yeah,
totally. And sadly and unfortunately, that's where a lot of people do go. They go off and do you know, drug taking for, you know, weekend or whatever they're doing, go do some magical, you know, South American drugs and all the other things. They have a weekend and they go off and do the drugs. It changes their mindset, and they believe they're having spiritual experiences. And some do, some can break through that and have them, but generally it's not. It's just the mind playing fantasy and tricks and imaginaries on them. That's, you know, pretty proven scientifically, psychologically these days. So I'm really pleased I did both. I did that drug world as a teenager, in the alcohol world, and then in my late 20s, I gave all that away and got really into my spiritual world, and I didn't do any more drugs. I haven't done drugs for like 30 odd years, and such a difference, that clarity. And in terms of how I got to sort of working in the men's space, the psychotherapeutic space, was pretty much because I was working on myself for, you know, probably from the age of 18, 19, 20. I started traveling around Europe from England, and I came to Australia when I was 24 years old, ended up in Tasmania, of all places. And I didn't leave Tasmania for 10 years. I was on the island for 10 years before coming to the mainland. So that was a real reclusive time after, you know, having a wild youth. I lived in Berlin for 4 years before coming to Australia. So that was a wild city back in the mid-80s, the music and the political scenes. And then coming to calm little Tasmania. And that was my healing space. That was where I really started to tune into nature, tune into my spiritual path. Is where I came across Rudolf Steiner 30 years ago. And I always had an interest in the mind. I was always sort of seeking psychology and social aspects of the planet. I was reading works of Kafka and George Orwell, my favorite author of all time, and reading that socio-political works, and then reading works on Buddhism, Christianity, etc. So my mind was always open, and just had this sense that I wanted to do more with my life, with myself, and expand beyond that 3D world. And no idea where that came from, except I believe it was, you know, from that early experience of 10 years old, where I knew there was more than just 3D world, because I'd seen it with my own eyes, or my own sixth sense. So it's quite a gift. That was a gift for me.
Absolutely. And that teacher was a huge gift for you.
Yeah.
And have you, since you moved through the drug era of your life, have you opened up again to that?
Yeah, look, I did. Look, it was probably at the age of 28, 29 is when I came across my main teacher, Rudolf Steiner, and at that point, it was a time of giving up. I was a 50-a-day cigarette smoker as well, by the way. So I was, I was totally into the addiction space. And as I gave that away, I recognized in my own self, my meditations were becoming very different and taking me to different spaces. My study was changing because I was studying quite deeply in anthroposophy, learning the language and the insights of Steiner, what he was bringing, and following his clear pathway of how to get into that spiritual world, how to go over the threshold, how to work in that spiritual space as well, and still studying that 30 years later. It's never-ending study. So yeah, it was a real differentiation for me of moving away from that drug alcohol world. That here it was numbing me. It was a numbing process, and once I sort of lifted the veil, so to speak, it's a very, very different world, and has been ever since. And I'm so pleased I made that conscious choice to step out of that world and not stay in it. I'd been in it long enough. Yeah, it's a very different space. It's two totally different worlds.
And this may seem like an obvious question to ask, but I don't know if it necessarily is. What was it, do you feel, actually led you into that path of the drugs and alcohol and things? Like, what do you, because I'm just wondering, what is it about men in particular? I know women do too, but men in particular, that they get caught into that path.
Yeah, so I started smoking at the age of 11, 12, so early smoker. And it was all about fitting in for me. Also, my parents separated when I was about 10, so that had a huge impact in my life. So I grew up very quickly. I was doing things at 11, 12 that most people were doing at 15, 16, 17. I was an early explorer, pioneer, and anything that was out there I would try. So most of my friends at that age were 1 or 2 or 3 years older than me. I always tended to hang around with older children. So I was learning things, sex, drugs, rock and roll at a very early age, and had that pioneer leader aspect to my being already at that age. In fact, going just a quick story, that teacher, Mr. Ginjal, who was my first mentor, when I was leaving primary school at the age of 11, 12 to go to high school, he took me aside and he said to me, "Adrian, I've got one piece of advice for you in your life." He said, "Don't be a leader, don't be a follower, be a leader." And that came from him as my parting gift from primary school. And subsequently, I kept in contact with him over the years, and right up actually until about 20 years ago, I went to visit, and he's passed away just a few years ago now. But as an adult, as a 40-year-old, I went back and visited him, and that was a most amazing experience to sit with him and drink tea with him and talk about how he was that mentor for me as a young child. And he didn't really realize, he hadn't quite realized the impact he did have in my life until I told him. It was quite beautiful.
That's really beautiful. Wow. And so you have this beautiful foundation, the Blue Wren, and what was it that inspired you to start that, and what does it do for men? Yeah, probably once again deeply subconsciously. It probably started when I was young because of my own challenges with my own family, with my dad, separation with my mum, and back in the UK back in those days, family conflict, violence wasn't really spoken about. Everybody pushed it under, and it was a silent topic. Nobody wanted to talk about what was happening in the home. So I think subconsciously, from everything I experienced with my parents fighting and neighbors and what I was seeing as a child, was somewhere sitting there. And then 25 years ago or so, I was in Tasmania, and I was in a men's group. We started a men's group on the back of a weekend workshop with about 100 men, a shamanic workshop, and a few of us got together afterwards, and we decided to start our own men's group. And we used to meet in a hall in Tasmania in Hobart called the All Saints Church Hall. So our men's group was called the All Saints. So that was for a bit of fun. And we had that group for 2 years, and every Tuesday night, almost without fail, we'd meet for a couple of hours, 7 men, and we started getting some real deep men's work. And at that time, a man called Steve Biddulph was on the scene. Steve Biddulph is a very famous Australian who wrote a book called Manhood.
and it sold millions of copies across the planet. I think it's like 8 million copies in different languages. So he became quite well known in that men's space. Men's work was starting to really take off in Australia at that time, 25, 30 years ago. And I was quite a big part of that in Tassie with our group. And when I then left and came to the mainland after that 2 years of being in that group, I then wanted to continue the men's work. So I did. I started running men's circles and getting more deeply into men's work. And then I did my psychotherapy training. And of course, a lot of my clients were men with challenges and issues and women with challenges and issues in relationship. So I started to hone in my psychotherapy and counseling work in that space of relationship work. And then just to lead into the story of the Blue Wren Foundation, 6 years ago, was in Queensland with Arlene, and I went to see Rosie Batty. I don't know if in Australia, Rosie Batty, and I just put it up. She wrote a book called A Mother's Story, and she became Australian of the Year. And the story is her son was killed by her ex-partner. And she wrote her story, her book, A Mother's Story, about what she'd endured through domestic violence for many, many years. And suddenly the word domestic violence just got elevated in Australia. It was quite big here already, but with Rose's book and her message and becoming Australian of the Year, of course, sort of everybody in Australia suddenly was aware that domestic violence was happening. So I went to her book launch in Brisbane, had a conversation with her for a few minutes, brought the book home, and over the course of a week, I read the book, and it pushed my buttons big time, just her story. Having been in the men's space, I've heard quite a few nasty stories already. Mm. And then I gave the book to Arlene, who we've mentioned already, my gorgeous wife, and she was reading the book, and we both got into conversation, emotional conversation over that. And I said to Arlene, I feel like I need to do more in the men's space around conflict and family and domestic violence and supporting men, not to go to that place. Like, I want to do some prevention work around the place. So, and I remember this clearly, it makes me emotional to think about it. Arlene climbed out of bed, she walked around the bed, she knelt down beside me in the bed. This was a Sunday night, like it's so clear to me. And she said, for me and all the other women on the planet, I'm going to challenge you to go and do the work. And yeah, I get sort of emotional just thinking about that. And I said, okay. So there and then I dived out of bed and I went downstairs and I just got my pen and paper and I just started to download everything that had been within me for all the years of men's work. I sort of wrote the program, if you like, of where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. And I just downloaded it. And I was writing pages and pages and pages of ideas and thoughts. And that was all well and good. And I thought, yep, okay, I'm going to do some programs and some work and gather the men. I'm going to gather some facilitators and set up a charity and all just downloaded. And then about, I think it's probably just 4 or 5 or 6 days later, I was talking to a friend, David, and we both had our PCs. He was down in Bellingen and I was in, at the time, I was in Brisbane. And we were having a conversation and he said to me, he said, just stop for a moment. He said, I'm just being surrounded by a flock of blue wrens. And I went, oh, wow. And he said, have a listen. And we were listening to the blue wrens while we were talking on Zoom. And David's a storyteller. And he said, Adrian, do you know the story about the male blue wren? And I said, no, David, tell me the story of the male blue wren. And David said, well, what happens is when there's a flock of wrens, and if another bird, say a scrub wren or another bird comes into that flock, the male wren will actually puff itself up and stand in front of the whole flock and protect the flock from that scrub wren. And I said, David, you can't believe what you've just done. I think you've just given me the name of the foundation I want to start, because your story represents that. If that's how I want men to be, that we stand up and we protect the community, we protect women, we protect ourselves. So the Blue Wren Foundation was born from that conversation. Subsequently, when I set up a charity called out for some facilitators. 7 men turned up. We did
before I lose this train of thought, I'm just going to interrupt you because
no,
as soon as you said that about the Blue Wren and how you see that as the men being the protectors of their family, is that you then focusing on redirecting that aggression towards being the protector and being that sort of more sacred masculine space?
Yeah, I do. Look, I think innately as men, and I'm just focusing clarity here because I know there's a lot of political different voices around masculine, feminine, and all the other aspects that we have to be politically correct around. I'm speaking quite now about the male-female relationship, so more of a traditional male-female relationship. When we do the work, we also obviously work with same-sex, etc. But just in terms of the explanation now, it's about that male energy, that when the male's in relationship with the feminine, just from an archetypal perspective, when we look at the archetypes traditionally, and I know that is changing, where that man was the protector, the man was the one that would hold that space to protect the family, the relationship, the woman, because ultimately we are physically stronger. That's just the way we are. But also from a energetic perspective, when men get into their sacred masculine and in their male energy, and they hold that energy, it means the female can also then become the female, and she doesn't have to take on that male persona, which gives her the freedom to become more female. So for me, it's about diving back into that archetype of the masculine feminine and honoring and owning that. And that's always a debate, obviously, with in this current time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk into this though, because I think it's important, and I think I know that I've personally experienced that trying to step into the masculine. Like my former career was as a personal trainer, so I was around men all the time and trying to have to be sort of like stronger and fitter. Of course I was never going to be, but it was, and leaving behind the feminine aspects of me. And so even if this is like a same-sex relationship, then you more likely, from my understanding anyway, and I'm happy to be corrected on this, but you tend to have maybe someone who holds the masculine pole and someone who holds the more feminine pole. And I'm sure there are other options within that as well, because we each have masculine within us and feminine within us. So looking specifically just at this type of relationship where you have a clearly defined masculine and a clearly defined feminine, when they're out of balance, can you talk a little bit about what that means for, and we'll just call him the man at this point in time for sake of getting too confused. So when the man is out of balance and he's not in his sacred masculine, what does that mean for him, and what does that mean for the people around him?
Yeah, so I talk very much about, we have the masculine feminine principle, and usually most people try and see that as a balanced yin yang, 50-50 energy space, where the woman's in her 50% female, the male's in their 50% male, and together they form the whole. And when that's in harmony, that's beautiful. Everything's hunky-dory and moving away. But I have a little bit of a different view on that in terms of that masculine energy. And I call it the 51-49% principle. And the reason I say that is when men take the initiative to be that masculine, when they take that initiative to give that extra little bit more in the relationship, to be that protector, to be that initiator, to be the one that makes the decision making, which inherently is that masculine male energy role, the form. If we talk about energy, the masculine is a form, of the feminine is more the flow. So when men get into the form, like that Saturn energy solidity, females can then get into their flow, they can get into their moon energy, and they can be more feminine. So I believe that men have to step up a little bit beyond the 50-50, so they can really show that they're in that masculine form to hold that sacredness of the relationship. So it's
I can see how men thinking that they're going to step on a little bit more would be beneficial for them.
Yeah. So by doing that, because in a lot of relationships where it's out of balance, oftentimes the balance is when the woman, let's call it, for the sake of the conversation there, the woman has to be the initiator. she has to do the initiation for the intimacy, the sexuality, for the dating, for the organizing of the home and all those other things, and initiate, which is predominantly a masculine energy form, is to be the initiator. But over the years, what we've lost as men is that sense of that initiation or initiation of action, the action taker, that will.
I can imagine one reason maybe why this is because I don't know, fear of rejection and fear of being told that they're maybe overstepping or being too masculine. And I certainly have known a lot of friends who, still some present, but mainly women who are kind of moving through this or have moved through this, is that they always feel like they're the ones that have to say, okay, we're going to go here. Okay, what do you want to do? Can you just make a decision? And so there, I don't know, has there been, in your view, a step back of men from being in that sacred masculine through fear, perhaps?
Yeah, well, I think what's happened is, in terms of historical, if we go back to the, say 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s in European society, the male did do that decision making, but it was done in that, let's call it that negative patriarchal way, where it was born not out of a sense of intimacy and let's do this from an intimate, connected space, but it was like, I'm the boss, we're going to do this because I said so. And that was prevalent for, for thousands of years, really. But in terms of our history of, my granddad, my dad, and then me, like 3 generations, which is usually all the mind can cope with, is that was pretty much how it was for those stronger men in that space. It was like, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. We're going to have this for dinner, we're going to go here, because that was his role, but it was done in a often aggressive way, controlling way. And the women just, and we know this from all the history and all the stories, women just went along with it. My husband told me to do it, so I did it. There wasn't much thought about, I have a choice, or if that was squashed. So I think from that Western world perspective, which I can only speak on because I haven't really studied other cultures that much, that's what we knew and that's what we do now. And the change of that then, of course, was, we've had 2 great wars in Western civilization, particularly 39 to 45. That was where, millions of men died, millions. I think 80 million people died on the planet from one war. So that affected the male psyche. It affected the female psyche, because that was a huge, big energy shift on the planet. And then suddenly men were coming and dealing with war for, and that took really 20 years to come out of that war. So the men were displaced, the females were displaced, relationships were challenging. So we've had a lot to deal with as men in terms of finding our role, because inherently men are not aggressive. Inherently we're not aggressive. What we are strong. We know how to hunt. We know how to kill if we need to kill, in terms of that dietary space of going out and killing for food. That was previous. So inherently we're not dangerous or violent people, humans. It's just that it's a learned behavior. We've learned to become violent. We allow ourselves to become violent. We make a choice to be violent. So we have to take something new now from that old story of, let's say the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s and 70s. And then what happened was women started to find their voice, particularly around the 60s, 70s, 80s, and then beyond, where suddenly women started to speak. It became quite political. And then men did 2 things. They either fought back against that, or they just went quiet. They put their slippers on and got their beer and sat and watched The Simpsons. So 2 things happened. Some men got aggressive towards that, and some men just gave up and stopped speaking. So it created a divide. So now the new paradigm for me is for men and women to do the inner work and then do the relationship work. So we work together, because really that's never been done before. We had sort of the men's movement, the female movement, and now I think it's time now to work together And what I mean by that is for women to go and do their women's business, men to go and do their men's business, and then do the relationship business. Because all of them need doing, from my perspective. I think, men need to do their men's work with men, women need to do their women's work with their sisters, with the women, and then those that share that journey of going together as a couple, they do the couple's work, they do the relationship work, and that's essential, because relationships are really hard work generally.
Yeah, I think it's definitely about connecting to who you truly are innately in yourself. And so is your belief that when the men come together as a group, because I'm sure you work with men of all different sexual orientation, and I'm sure you work with men who, like a man who's in a relationship with a woman and yet he is maybe more feminine, and so you still find, in what ways is it still like really important to get all the men together regardless of where they fit in their masculine and feminine and what feels most right for them?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and what's happening right now, people are looking at themselves and really questioning their sexual orientation, their how they are as a man or as a woman. And some people are choosing not to be just in that traditional male-female relationship. Some people choose same sex, some people choose multiple partners. So there's a whole gambit of different ways to be in relationship, but still the predominant male-female is what we focus on predominantly, notwithstanding we also then work with other relationship connections as well, whether that's...
Is that where the most amount of need is?
No, not necessarily. Look, we've for instance, the Blue Wren Foundation, we've got several facilitators, and one of our facilitators is a gay man. And eventually what we want to do with the Blue Wren Foundation is have specific workshops for gay men in relationship, because there are different elements of the relationship that I don't know because I'm not gay, and that's respect, that I wouldn't understand because I'm not in that space. There will be different ways of being in that particular relationship that wouldn't be in a heterosexual relationship, for instance.
Okay, cool. So you're working with what you know.
Oh, yeah, I think that's the safest place to work.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Yeah. But what we have done, we've made a space for that we're going to build in as we go forward with Matt, our gay facilitator. Is a beautiful man, and he really wants to get into that space. And I'd like to be in that space with him as a co-facilitator, so I can learn more, obviously, in that space. And I have lots of gay friends, male and female gay friends who are in female, male relationships. Always had lots of gay people around me, and there is a difference in the relationship. But oftentimes, and I think you alluded to this before, there is still an element of, let's call it the masculine and feminine at play in that, or the dominant, less dominant in those plays, regardless of the sexual orientation, because that's just the nature of things, that in relationship usually there's a bit more of a dominant and a bit more of a less dominant. So that's how we get the balance. Would
you refer to it as dominant and less dominant though? Because I wouldn't, in my view, I wouldn't consider the masculine more dominant. Yeah. I would maybe in some ways, and then other ways the feminine would be more dominant. Yeah. So I don't know. Like
so I like to use the word initiator rather than dominant, because dominant's usually got a negative connotation these days, in terms of negativity of dominant means control. So for me, it's the one that takes more of the initiative, that male energy initiative to drive the relationship forward. I would say that's got more of a masculine principle to it than feminine principle. So that's usually...
Yeah, and we have that within us too. Like when I take action, I'm initiating from my inner masculine place.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. So how has this changed the men that you work with? How has it changed their lives? What have they gone from and to? Like what are some stories?
So I think the most prominent and obvious thing that happens with men, when men step into making a choice to do the personal development work, that's the change. Because men suddenly, they get the mirror, they hold the mirror up, and hopefully, and they start to look at what they do well, but also what they don't do as well for themselves and in the relationship and in the community. So then men start to make the changes to become, as it says behind me, I know I'm a good man, but I want to be a better man. And because inherently we're all good men, but how can I take that to be a better man physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and all the other aspects of life? And
can I just interrupt you before I forget? Because I keep thinking of these things and then
okay, no, keep going. This is great.
But I love that this is behind you. I know I'm a good man, because I'm sure there are lots of men who think they're not good men at this point in time, whether they're in prison or whether something happened in a relationship where they lost control or something. And my feeling on that is you never condone the behavior, but the person, you don't want to kind of condemn the person. So do you kind of work with that principle, and if so, how?
Yeah, we do. So one of the main principles in the Blue Wren Foundation, or facilitators when we're in the space, is we try to come from a place of non-judgment, firstly, because who am I to judge when I have negative behavior of my own? And this is a big part of the current men's movement. There are a lot of men out there condemning other men, and who want to lock up other men, and they want to subject men through shame, etc. And yet those very men have not done any or much personal work themselves. And I think that doesn't doesn't bode well with me when that happens. And I see that a lot in this current industry, and I challenge that a lot. And we challenge those men in particular to come and do some work with us, so they can look at their own behavior, even if it's subtle, before we can condemn another man. So I think there's a saying about, don't condemn a man until you've walked in his shoes. And I think that's so true. So a lot of what we do with those men is we work with them, and regardless of what they've done, we try to come from a place of empathy, compassion, non-judgment, which is not easy sometimes. I'm telling you, it's not when you hear some of the stories. My anger still comes up, my frustration still comes up. I still get triggered. Yet, if we keep working with the men in blaming and shaming and locking up and all those non-compassionate ways of working, all we're doing is compounding the situation and making the situation worse for two reasons. One, the men won't want to come and do the work. And secondly, those men who have a possibility of becoming angry or violent, we can't work with them in the beginning to prevent that, because they won't come because of the stories they hear about men being judged and shamed and blamed. So for me, it's a big block to the work, is when this old paradigm of working, and I see it all the time through the media, through, a lot, I would say some, but a lot of the police, a lot of politicians, the language they use about blaming and shaming and, locking up the maggots and, and all this language you hear about men. Well, how about we just show a bit of compassion and say, okay, we don't condone the behavior, of course, and yet how can we then work with the men to make it change? Because I'm a great believer in everybody, given the time and the space and the energy, can transform and work. I really believe that. It may take a long, long time, because inherently we're not born violent.
Yeah. And so how do you bring, you coined a word, spiritual something or other. What's your word you coined? Spiritualosophy or something?
Spiritualogical.
Spiritualogical.
Yeah.
How do you bring spiritualogical stuff into your work with men? And do you find they embrace it? Because I'm seeing more and more men like you, and my partner is a great example, who are very spiritual and very connected to their intuitive gifts and things. Are men kind of open to that, and do they need to be to do this work?
Yeah. So a great way to enter into that space with the men and is to firstly work on what we call the emotional intelligence. So we start to work with men with their feeling realm, because a lot of men have had that squashed, or they've chosen to squash that feeling realm from themselves, and that I call it the soul work. So they've closed their soul down. They don't recognize that aspect of themselves. So the entry point for me into any deeper spiritual work is, before we go into the spiritual, is through the soul or feeling space, and we get into the emotional work. So what we do, we work with the men from an emotional perspective, getting them in touch with emotions, and then that opens the portal, opens the door for that further work for those that want to go into more of that spiritual realm. And then we start looking at things like purpose in life and passion, and what are you actually here to do? Can you bring some deeper aspect in? So we introduce things like quiet time or meditation, which is a good entry point into that spiritual realm. And then men get that sense of maybe there's a bit more than just this 3D world. So I like to sort of open potential doorways for the men, and then leave them.
So you're opening the doorways, would it be fair to say, with the feminine?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because if we look at that emotional feeling space, that is traditionally seen as the feminine space from that yin yang perspective. And of course, that's what we do. We open them up into that feeling feminine soul realm, so they can actually then express their feelings to their partners. They can show their emotive side to their partners, and women are just needing that connection with their men on that space. It's like the missing piece of the jigsaw is, all I want my man to do, and I hear this all the time, and you probably hear it too in your circles, is I just want my man to be more emotional, more connected, more into his feeling. I want to be able to talk to him on a deeper level. I want to talk to him on that soul level. And there are ways to do that, and some simple ways. I'm just running a men's online program at the moment, a 6-week program, and this idea of deeper communication comes up all the time with men. How do I talk to my partner in a deeper emotional space? How do I do that connection? Because I don't know. I've never been shown. My dad didn't show me, and the men down the pub don't show me.
Are they also afraid of it though?
They're not so much afraid of the conversation. They just don't know what to talk about. They really don't know how to let the words come out of their mouth often, because it's not their language. For many men. So what we do, we introduce tools and resources to help them do that. And one of the resources I say to the men is, and this is quite common with a lot of women, particularly more consciously open women. They have inspiration cards. Most people know what inspiration cards are. You see them even in newsagents and supermarkets these days. And I said to men, if you want to just start a conversation, we just did this with a man in the group. So he's going off this week to buy a box of inspiration cards because he knows his wife likes them as well. And he's going to come back and just suggest, why don't we sit down and have a card reading together? And then that's a deeper level of communication. So it's an opening, it's a beginning. And there are many ways to start those conversations happening. But for most men in that space, Penny, is the men simply do not know how to begin. They just don't know. So they're stuck. They just can't have that conversation. So by teaching the men some skills to begin that conversation, of course, then you can imagine the female partner and that's suddenly going, wow, my partner's now ready to have a deeper conversation with me. And it's.
So have you seen relationships that have involved some, pretty horrific abuse? They've actually come back from that. Have you seen that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've worked with I've worked with lots of couples where there's been psychological, physical, and other forms of abuse in the relationship. And let's say, for now, for the conversation, from the male towards the female, because it happens both ways, of course. But that's the conversation here with the Blue Wren, is we're helping those men to stop themselves. So what we do, we work with the men when we run our line in the sand programs. That's what the programs are called. Stopping men stepping over the line in the sand. Those men will come with stories and say, yeah, I'm admitting here and here that I've pushed my wife, I've hit my wife, I've yelled at my wife, I've screamed at my wife, I've sweared at my wife, I play psychological games with my wife. And then we work with those men to help them change those behaviors and attitudes, and they do. And I've seen couples on the brink of separation, and they've done the work, and I've worked with them over several weeks or months, and they've worked and worked and worked, and they find that new space. And a lot of the time, Penny, those men that do the abusing in the relationship, a couple of things, many of them have been abused themselves by another male, often the father, in the relationship. Even that's just a case of, as a child, just being hit every time you did something wrong. I mean, that's abuse. That I call it for what it is. it's abuse. So if you're a 5-year-old child and you drop a glass on the floor and you break it, and what the men often do, rather than going, oh, you've broken something that's cleaned up together, they get a whack around the ear.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I know with certain people that I work with, that whole thing of the war, that it just compounds as it goes through the generations. You'd think, oh, it'll kind of dilute out, but actually it's the opposite. It gets worse through, and then all of a sudden some kind of trigger can happen, and it can snap, and then this abuse can all of a sudden come out. I've certainly seen that happen before. So sometimes the man's just always following, say, their father or their grandfather's patterns, and other times it's just like something triggers. Have you seen that as well?
Yeah, I have looked. There's many levels to that. There's that inherent sort of DNA level where it's become part of our DNA because of that. Oftentimes if you do something repetitively through the generations, it goes into that sort of the DNA of the next generations. So part of us have taken on some of that war aspect of our grandfathers and our fathers into our patterning and our belief systems. Mm-hmm. And then of course, we always got to come back to choice. What can I choose to do in those situations? And oftentimes men don't know there is a choice because it's such a habit. It's such a habit where we lash out or we yell or we scream or we hit. So because that's what some men have always known in their family dynamics from their fathers and their grandfathers and those around them. So we have to know there's a different way. We have to know there's a different choice.
Do you find that there are still men who know there's a different choice but aren't able to make it because they're triggered?
Yeah, of course. I get triggered myself. I get angry. I get upset.
And what can we do from your perspective around circumnavigating that trigger either before it happens? Yeah, before it happens, really.
Yeah. So I'm a great believer from a psychotherapeutic perspective. We have to name it to tame it. So we have to know exactly what those triggers are. So in my work as a psychotherapist and counselor, I work very deeply with the people I'm working with, and we find out exactly what those triggers are, what the reaction to those triggers are. So we have to stop the reaction, and then we have to come into a response place rather than a reactive space in that space. And most people just do it unconsciously. They just, we react, we get triggered, and we can get triggered by a word, a smell, a touch, a memory. There's a million ways to get triggered. And in relationships, of course, because we're so close to our partners and, sort of almost melded in that energy space, those triggers are just right on the skin. They're not even deep sometimes. And it's easy to get triggered by our partners with a word or a look or a touch.
And so are you finding a way that you're actually able to take the charge out of this trigger so that when the trigger comes, it's not like they've got this like lid on a pot of steam and it just blows off? It's like there might be a little bit of steam in there, but they're kind of like, actually, because I've now taken the charge out, I can see there's no smoke in front of my eyes. I can see there might be a haze of smoke, but I might actually like, oh, okay, I can do something now.
Yeah, I can breathe through this one. So I have a bit of a trick with particularly with the men I work with, and because I like to have a little bit of fun in my work as well, because otherwise I get that too deep and serious. And I call it the superglue process. So what I do is say to the guys, and I do this when I work with couples, and the women love watching this. So imagine we're sitting in my studio or online, and I share it. So right, okay, men, you've got 3 tubs of superglue. I want you to get the first one. I want you to get your left foot. And I want you to put superglue on your left foot and stamp it on the floor. And I want you to get the second one on your right foot, underneath your foot, stamp your foot on the floor. Right, now they're stuck to the floor. And now the third one is lift your bum off the seat, put the superglue on there, put your bum in the seat. Right, now you're superglued in. Now put your seatbelt on. Now you're ready for a conversation with your partner. Because it takes a lot of vulnerability, a lot of courage, for both, for men and women, but in particular for men, because of that emotional feeling space, which we're, a lot of men are uncomfortable with. So we have to learn to stay in the seat. We have to learn to be there, to be in the conversation. That's one.
Because running away would be a big part of it too. They'd want to just get up.
Of course. Well, we either go into fight or flight. They're the two, or freeze. So we go into that. And for men, often they go into the cave. They do the flight into the cave, and they stay in that cave. Deep, dark recesses of the cave for years sometimes. or they come out fighting and arguing and justifying and all those other things we do as well. Particularly for men, if we feel criticized, that's the big trigger for a lot of men is criticism. It's probably one of the most common triggers for men to be criticized by their partner. Men in general, and generalizing again, don't take criticism well. And that criticism has two ways, fight or flight. And then, of course, that causes... so what we have to do is teach some communication skills, some basic skills, 101 communication, so that when that feeling of being judged comes up or criticized comes up, you can breathe and let it go, breathe and let it go, breathe and let it go. It's just her language. It's just, and I say to the men, oftentimes the communication is just because we're clumsy in our narrative. That's a lot of the triggers are because we're clumsy in our narrative and we're clumsy in the way we deliver our speech. And when we deliver that speech clumsily, what happens is, the arrow goes in, whoomp, it's and then we have a wound, and then of course we try and communicate from a wounded space, and so a lot of the work with the men is cleaning up the wounds, from all the history, from the first girlfriend right through to the current partner, and most of us have got at least 100 wounds from the feminine, and the feminine have got 100 wounds to the masculine. So we have to do a lot of healing around that. So we do that in the Blue Wren Foundation in our workshops. I
mean, that's going to be that's how you're basically diffusing the triggers, really, because totally, as that all that steam is disappearing. So Adrian, I'm getting a feeling from you that you really believe in men. And that you've got this strong, obviously you're a man, but you have this strong belief in men, and you've seen how there's been events of history in globally and also within their own ancestral lineage that have really put them out of balance and just like thrown shit at them constantly, and they've not been able to cope well with that because we've not had the kind of support. I mean, you said your foundation's been around for 30 years, but there's so many men who wouldn't have known about that.
6 years, the foundation. Yeah,
right,
I've been around doing men's work for 30, but Blue Wren's 6 years old. Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of men who wouldn't have been aware of that type of thing as well. And if so, they wouldn't have known how to kind of find it or reach out for it or know that it was okay for them to do. Yeah. And so, do you want to just talk a little bit about your belief in men and like their innate sacredness and where they're moving to?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, because of the circles I walk in, I see it more commonly than maybe other men, because I'm in that space. Most of my male friends are in that sacred masculine energy space, and we've done a lot of work together because I choose to have those men in my circle, of course, because they're the men I connect with. But I also, not to degrade, footy fans. I'm not sort of trying to segregate different aspects of men in different segments, but I'm also a footy fan. I go to the footy and I hear the worst of language, and I see the worst of behavior, particularly around alcohol, post-match and all that stuff. I live on the Goldie, so you can imagine Saturday night here, there's some pretty awful incidents with male. And a big part of that is alcohol. Alcohol is a huge, big factor in men's behavior and relationship behavior. It's one of the biggest challenges is to get men to look at their alcohol consumption. Domestic violence on the spikes of Friday and Saturday nights. That's when most domestic violence happens in Australia and across the world, because that's when in the Western world, when the alcohol gets fueled.
Yeah. But despite this, you still have this huge belief in men, or maybe because of this. Yeah,
because it's not inherently the spirit of the man to be violent. It's not inherently the spirit of the human being to be aggressive.
Can you speak into that a little bit more? Because I really like that I love that you're sharing this, and I absolutely agree with you, but I'd really love you to share what you feel the sacred masculine, the sacred man is, and who he is.
Yeah, I think firstly, and by all means, I'm still working on myself on this one, but it's how do we find our moral code? And for me, it's always about finding that spiritual moral code of what I would do to myself and what I would do to the others and what I'll do to the planet. And if we keep working on that continually, how do I work on the inner self-love for Adrian, self-love for my brothers and sisters, and love for the planet? For me, that's the way forward, is to keep continually challenging myself and to challenge and inspire and invite other men to come and do the same. Like, how can we find that inner self-love? Because if we've had a wound, you know, particularly from another male, then to say I love myself or I care for myself and to show respect for myself is really difficult, because we weren't shown that as a young man. We weren't shown that love and respect and sense of self. So it's sort of a new paradigm that's opening up for the masculine and the feminine, but females in general have been better at it for the last, you know, 4 or 5 decades. There have been a lot of work around that women's space. Women tend to be a bit more connected with each other, where they talk about self-care and self-love and emotions, whereas men...
Do you think that there's a risk, or maybe just in recent history, there's a risk of the sacred masculine being lost through fear of a man being a man? Because there's been a lot of criticism around, you know, quite rightly, the behavior of certain men, but it's only a few men. It's not all men, of course. And do you think that a lot of, maybe even the more sensitive ones who are very compassionate and understanding, have kind of retreated within themselves and taken their kind of initiative masculine and like locked it away? Do you think there's a bit of a danger of that?
Yeah, I think one of the clear things, Penny, is we have to define what masculine is. And of course, now to define masculine, then, like from my perspective, of that initiator energy of the male, that now is not the truth for a lot of men. They don't want to be in that initiator space. They want to be more that feminine. So for them, that's their definition of being masculine as well. So it's really difficult unless we go back to that archetypal masculine. And of course, people are now trying to break down that archetypal masculine because of the, you know, political and social climate we live in, and people want to be different. So it's very difficult to say that is still what most men want. And yet when I work with couples in particular, there still is that inherent need and want and belief and desire for that masculine female energy to be in that balance that I'm speaking about, where the females want those men to be a bit more in their power, and then the men want the women to be a bit more less masculine and a bit more in their open femininity to be the receiver. So,
okay, so let's speak into just those, though that particular couple. Have you witnessed that there are some men who innately want to be the initiator and that's who they truly are, but they're kind of retreating through fear of being too masculine or out of balance masculine? Yeah,
totally, because the narrative right now is the word patriarchy, is a dirty word. It's, you know, if you're patriarchal, it means you're a violent man almost. You know, that's what the media and the has done, and in the domestic violence space, that is the language that's used. You know, the word patriarchy is, you know, people want to take away patriarchy. They don't want, you know, because they've used it in a negative perspective. And yet, if I think back to that patriarchal lineage, of my grandfathers and my father, I mean, I'm proud of that patriarchal side as I am as proud as the matriarchal, you know, the feminine and the masculine. So patriarchy just means, you know, for me, the masculine lineage, and the matriarchal means the feminine lineage. But because of the political situation and the misunderstanding and the misuse of that word patriarchal, we can't then honor the patriarchy anymore.
Right.
And that's, for me, that's dangerous. We're playing in dangerous grounds when we say, you know, the patriarchal lineage, because just that word in itself, you know, politically can't be used anymore because it's been muddied and misused.
I feel this is quite similar to when, and I'm sure there are, and I know there are many feminists who are not of this persuasion, but I think there are some who almost feel that in order to lift women up, we have to push men down. And I'm very, I have a very different view than that, because I think then we're going to end up in the push down, pull down phase, and there's always going to be one who's out of balance. And when one's out of balance, everybody loses. And so if we can there are so many men wanting to support women, equal pay and equal respect and all this kind of stuff. And it helps, you know, we need to lift ourselves up, they need to lift us up, respect us, and then we're all equal. If one is more important than the other, then we're out of balance and, I don't know, society falls or something. Like, it's all a big mess.
It does, and once again, you know, there's some in that space. You know, let's call it you know, family relationship space, family domestic violence space, relationship education space, where a lot of people in this, you know, industry, and there's you know, tens of thousands of people in Australia now working in this. You know, it's almost like a new industry, to be honest. It's you know, the DV industry. It's supporting and employing, you know, tens of thousands of people that 20 or 30 years ago it wasn't an industry, in a sense, myself included. You know, I'm getting more and more into that industry of this, and a lot of people in that space, the men and the women, have got big wounds from their own history. And my take is, unless the people in the industry go and do the personal development work on themselves, they're going to bring so many triggers, and they do, and I've seen it, and I see it every day, where a lot of the conversation and communication is full of triggers. It's full of non-healed wounds. And
it's really about taking responsibility for ourselves, isn't it? Like that radical responsibility. Instead of, let's say somebody is watching this and they're like, something you or I have said has triggered them, they'll blame us rather than be like, what does this mean for me? And you know, sometimes it's like, I need to do something about that. But we need to heal that trigger within us first. And so I think that's really what you're saying, is this is a big part about your men, that I know you work with women as well, but your men who are taking responsibility for their emotions, for their feelings, for their actions, and saying, what is this within me that is making me feel this way?
Yeah, totally. And this is the big work. And one of the parts of the work I love is if I'm working with a couple, and you know, male, female, and they're online or in the room with me in my studio, and we get to that place as I go, okay, you two have a conversation for a couple of minutes, and I'm going to sit back and observe, and then we're going to evaluate that communication. So just talk about you know, something that you did together yesterday. It was a bit of a trigger for you, and usually within 3 minutes, wow, you know, that's gone into the blame game, you know, the justification game, the wounds are, you know, so prevalent. You can almost see the arrows being thrown energetically across the room. And then I say, okay, now let's stop. Now let's unpack this feeling. So then we get into a bit of psychotherapeutic body work, and we do some gesture work, and we'll get them to show their feelings through the body. You know, how does that feel, rather than doing it verbally? Show your partner in the body what it feels like. So we do a lot of that psychotherapeutic work, and they get to see the impact of their communication or lack of communication with their partner. And then I say, so what can you do to take responsibility for the way you deliver to your partner, but also the way you receive from your partner? So it's always two ways: responsibility for what's going out and responsibility for what's coming in. So where are you? The way
you are receiving it, because we're receiving it through our own lenses, aren't we?
Totally would. And what often happens in intimate relationship, we have that filter system of everything that's coming in. We filter through every past relationship we've ever had in like a nanosecond. And if there was a wound back then, when, you know, in the last 20 or 30, 40 years, and that wound is re-triggered by something our partner said or done, or the look, you know, can just be a look. And then, of course, the person sitting opposite us isn't our current partner. It's our old partner from 30 years ago, energetically, because that's the inner memory or inner feeling. So suddenly we are reacting from an old wound that's 30 years old. And our partner's going like, why are you being a nong right now? Like, all I said was you left the lid off the toothpaste. But of course, it's got nothing to do with that current moment. It's about the memory of the last time that he left the lid off the toothpaste. You know, the girlfriend left him, or whatever the wound was. So you know, the mind doesn't, and the soul doesn't forget any incident that we've ever had in a life. That we have the whole story of our whole life tucked away, hidden away, and they come out through triggers. They come out through actions of the. So what we do, we I work with the couples, the men and the women, to look at what those triggers do. So we do a whole biographical review of your relationships. Where did you get hurt? Where did you get triggered? You know, where are the wounds? And most men and most women can come up with at least half a dozen deep wounds, and then lots of smaller wounds.
Can I ask you to talk a little bit about the word blame at the moment? Because I find that people often get triggered when we talk about taking responsibility because they think it means it's their fault.
Yeah, and usually it is their fault. Let's get really clear, Penny. Usually it is their fault, you know.
Well, I mean, when we talk about an action, right? Like, so if I punch you in the face, sure, it's my fault.
Yeah.
But what I'm looking about is saying, what I'm really talking into is saying, take responsibility for the ancestral wounds you have, take responsibility for the triggers that you have. And it's not like it's your fault that you are this way, but you now have that choice to make a new decision because you've become aware of this. So it's not like, I guess I look at people and say, you know, this is, you know, whatever's happened, we're not blaming you for it. We're just saying this is why it's happened. Now you can take responsibility. So I don't know, maybe you look at that in a different way. What do you feel about that word?
So the first thing always is, you know, and I say to the men, and I'm working with a few couples at the moment, and predominantly in my couples work, it's the female that does the initiation of coming to make appointments to see me, and then she will then ask the male partner to come and join that conversation. It happens sometimes where the man will come first and say, yeah, I've got some challenges in my relationship and now I want to invite my partner in to have a couple session with you. But that initiation, once again, is coming from the female because she's had enough, and you know the man isn't doing the work, and there's something not around the relationship. So the first thing to do is to ask the person, are you willing to do the work? And that's always the first question. And oftentimes it's, yep, I am. And then they'll try, and then they, you know, disappear back into the cave, or they continue. And those that continue, we get to that place where we say, okay, let's look at that wound space. Let's look at where you are right now in your life. What are you still carrying within? And can we name that? Can we go back to that place and then heal that? And I've just come through something last year with Arlene, my partner. We went back, and I'm a great believer in, you know, getting the vision back into where that trigger and wound was from, and it was a huge one. And I went back to when I was 7 years old, so a 50-year wound that was creating some behavior that I wouldn't put on my resume, let's say that, in my relationship. And it was a big one for Arlene and I to work through, and it took, you know, quite a lot of work over several months to really dig deep into what that was. And it was a spiritual experience, a negative spiritual experience when I was 7 years old. And I've been playing that out in all my relationships to some degree for 50 years. Now I'm aware of it. I'm not saying it's fully healed, but I'm aware of it, and I'm working on it, and I'm healing it, and things are getting better. Some of these wounds we have a deep that, unless you go and see somebody who's skilled enough to be able to take people back to those original wounds, they're just going to stay hidden, and that behavior is going to continue. And it's okay, you know, talking to a mate down the pub over a beer about your wounds, or the hairdresser or whatever, but in reality, if you want to get into deep psychological subconscious work that's deep, you have to see somebody who's skilled in that space to bring it out. And you know, 98% of people have a wound of some sort, you know, psychological, physical, emotional, spiritual, and well hidden. And people hide them well. You know, we hide them well. And out of that, and going back to your question of blame, is the shame and the blame. You know, often as men, we are shamed into not speaking, and so it's easy to blame the other because we protect that shame. So the big thing men do really well is they protect their shame, and I always say to protect the shame, we will blame.
Yeah.
And it's so common, and that's where a lot of blame comes from, is because we protect that little inner child, because we don't want to go there. It's too vulnerable for men to go in that space, and women, of course. So it's easier to, you know, put up that blame shield and keep blaming and justifying and blaming and justifying, because to expose that little inner child in that wound is too much.
Yeah, too big, right?
Too big.
So I just want to kind of ask you one question that's kind of two. If a woman is listening to this,
yeah,
and she's struggling either in a relationship or has struggled in a relationship in the past, what advice would you give her? And then I'm going to ask you a similar thing.
yeah. Okay. So one thing I would say to the woman is go and see a professional.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and and for women, obviously, I do say that it's probably not always, but oftentimes to go and speak with another woman who has skills and who's not going to get too triggered by the story, because it's okay, sharing it with friends, but they're probably going to get triggered. So some professionals done enough inner work that the story is going to be a place of healing rather than just a fest where you just put down the man and blame the man. That's not helpful for anybody.
Yeah, the key thing is that someone who's done the inner work and is still doing the inner work. I completely agree.
Yeah, and has the professional skills to support. So that's number one. And secondly, to really get clear on, and I say this to all couples, is what's the agreement in the relationship? Can you formulate an agreement where certain things can happen and certain things can happen? What are the boundaries in those agreements? So firstly, your agreement for yourself. What do you want from a relationship? What do you expect from a relationship? What are you going to allow in your relationship for your own respect and safety and desires and needs? So just get clear on that first. And if that's not happening in the relationship, then the invitation is there then to talk to the partner and say, look, relationship's not going very well. How I see it is I'd like more of this and less of this. How do you feel about that? And oftentimes it's everything's okay. What are you talking about? If there's a problem, go and sort it out. And that's that not taking responsibility. Because there's always two sides of the story in couples work.
Yeah. And so now for a man listening to this who wants to just grow or step more into his sacred masculine or have better relationships, like what's your advice? I mean, they can obviously come and do some work with you, and I'll ask you how they can contact you soon. But if they were going to take something on that they could do straight away, like what would that be?
I would say sit with yourself for half an hour with a pen and paper and do a self-evaluation. And ask yourself, how am I a good man? What do I really do beautiful in my life and in my relationship and for the planet? And be okay with that, to say, I'm a gentleman, I'm a kind man, I will protect my kids and my partner or whatever, and just all those beautiful attributes that we have as men. And then look at where those things you probably wouldn't put on your resume and get clear about them, be honest about them and say, and don't have to share that to begin with, but just become aware of that and then make the decision that, and I want to change that. I know I'm a good man, but I want to be a better man, and make a decision to then find an avenue to be able to go and do that work, either with, one-on-one or in a group with other men. But I think it's essential now to take responsibility for our actions, our behaviors, our thoughts, and where we are for ourselves and our relationship with ourselves and with our partners, but also from that bigger community space. When I walk in my community, are people in the community saying, hey, look, there's a really good man over there. He's really done some work, and he's the sort of man I would like my young boy or my child to look up to as an ambassador for being a man. And I think this is where I go. And if I look around my own community, there are a bunch of men. I look at them and go, you know what? As I grow into my 60s and 70s and 80s, there's a few men that I look up to and go, that's the sort of man I want to become. And I think we've lost that to some degree. We've lost that sense of eldership. We've lost that sense of respect for who we'd like to look up at in the community. Because if I look out there, the leaders in business, in politics, in all sorts of leadership as men, there's not many men I revere in that space. There's not many that I hold in honor in that space because of their behavior, because of what they say, what they do, because of what comes out of their mouth or how they're acting.
And so, I think the lack of inner work, because and I'm sure that you agree with this, but I have the utmost respect for people who've been through difficult stuff, done bad things, you know, quote unquote bad things, and then they've managed to turn their lives around, done the inner work, and really gone through that. Like for me, I'm gonna find that person so much more interesting, and I'm going to honor them and respect them more deeply because they were able to confront those things and move through them. And I'm not looking for someone with a squeaky clean, you know, I've never done anything, put a foot out of line kind of people. I mean, I'm sure they're great too, but
I'm trying to find one who has a squeaky clean, you know, life. Because
but if you're a politician, or if you're one of those people in the you know, the public arena, that's how you kind of have to come across. Otherwise people tear you apart, or there's that cancel culture, and it's like, you did this thing. I think young kids are dealing with that at the moment, is like somebody does something and that the behavior is bad, and so we don't want that behavior, but then that human is cancelled completely, and I think that's really dangerous.
Yeah, and I think sadly what a lot of the narrative in the media is that a lot of the violence from men towards women, it's more lower social economical class rather than the broad spectrum. And just to share a story, I was in Sydney several years ago, and I gave a talk on behalf of the Blue Wren and the White Ribbon Foundation. I was an ambassador for many years for White Ribbon as well. And I was at a very exclusive girls' school in Sydney at a breakfast, a White Ribbon breakfast, and I was one of the keynote speakers. And there were people from, you know, quite economically advanced families in there. You know, it was a pretty prestigious girls' school, so the fees were pretty high. So a lot of big business people, a lot of politicians in the room, et cetera, et cetera. And I think there were, you know, 150 girls and 150 men in the room. Like, it was a big breakfast. And I shared something. I said, it was a Friday morning early, and I said, okay, traditionally on a Friday in business and in politics and all those other places, what happens is 4 or 5 o'clock, it's finish work and have a few drinks. And I said, and that's sort of Australian standard for men and women, but men in that space. And then go home and have dinner, and there's probably another couple of glasses of wine. And then, you know, 8 o'clock, there's probably another couple. So I said, by the time you've sort of from 4 o'clock to 10 o'clock, for a lot of men, a lot of families, there's a lot of alcohol consumption. And I said, what happens is, for the girls in this room now, and these girls are between the ages of 14 and 16, they then become witness to the after effect of that alcohol by listening through the bedroom walls of the conflict that alcohol causes. And the room went silent. The girls in the room, you could see them looking up going, yep. You know, a lot of them, you know, were going, yep, that's our experience. And you could see the men in the room sort of, you know, going to their shame. You know, not that's what I was trying to do. I wasn't trying to shame it. I said, so tonight, my one request for all the men in the room, for all the dads in the room, is when you finish at 4 o'clock today, is to become conscious of your alcohol consumption. And maybe, if you can, is to reduce it or stop it, and see what your connection to your daughter is on Friday night, Saturday morning after this.
Wow.
After that conversation, I had probably 20 men from the room come up to me and shake my hand and just look me in the eyes and say, mate, that was just so beautiful. I'm going to go home and I'm doing that. But I reckon the biggest thing for me was probably 40 young girls came up to me afterwards and said, thank you. I'm going to feel so much safer tonight by hopefully my dad in the room doing what you've asked him to do tonight. So just one little action, that's just the alcohol. Yeah. And just connecting with the men by not threatening them, not blaming them, not shaming them, but just telling a bit of an anecdotal story of what can be possible if they take responsibility.
That's so beautiful.
It's coming back to responsibility.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. So how can people get hold of you, and how can men and also women and men who are interested in the relationship side of this get in touch with you for the Blue Wren?
So probably straight to the Blue Wren website, bluewrenfoundation.com. They can go straight on there, and they can email me from there. I'm also contactable on there with my phone number on my adrianhanks.com website, but Blue Wren's probably a good inroad because that's the topic today. And there's quite a few videos on there. There's lots of information on there. There's information on there about an upcoming workshop we have, which is for male leaders in the community, for business and community leaders. We're actually doing an online Line in the Sand program for male leaders in the community. That's coming up in September. So we're very open to men who see themselves as leaders, who have that sense of, yeah, I'm a leader in the community or business. Who'd like to come along, do the one-day program. It was going to be live on the Goldie for 2 days, but because of lockdown, we're going online. And those men will come on and they'll get something for themselves personally, but also they'll be able to go back to their communities in business and in the community sphere and share some of their experience to inspire other men to come and do the work as well. So we're looking for those leaders to say, you know what, we've done this, we've stepped into our courage and our vulnerability, and now we'd like to offer that space for other men as well. Because it's about men leading men now, I think, forward, rather than men feeling pressured to go because their female partners have asked them to go and do something. And that's about taking that initiative, you know, men taking the initiative to take responsibility. And I think that's the key for us here, Penny, to go forward in that vein.
Awesome. That's really, really great. Yeah, I mean, I can just feel your spirit around this and your commitments to really supporting families and individuals through the work that you do. And so thank you so much for your time today. And I'm sure there's going to be lots of people who would have gained lots of insights and wisdom from our kōrero, from our talk today. So yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, Penny. I've loved it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Adrian. See ya. Thank you so much for watching, for listening. If you've enjoyed this, I'd love you to like it. Please share it with those who you think it would benefit, and subscribe to my channel. I would love to help more people just to weave their magical worlds. The more people who are doing it, the better it is for all of us. Ka kite anō.